All right, let's dive into one of the most game-changing periods in world history, 1200 to 1450. Now, the big story here isn't just about empires rising and falling. The real theme is how the world got smaller, how connections between people and places exploded. We're talking about the birth of a truly interconnected Afro-Eurasian world, and it's going to lay the groundwork for everything that comes next.
So here's our learning plan. In this session, we're going to be analyzing the causes and effects of those massive trade networks across Afro-Eurasia. We'll break it down by looking at each major route and its consequences. By the time we're done here, you'll be able to confidently explain and, more importantly, compare how these networks of exchange actually worked and the huge impact they had on the world.
Here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the spark, what really kicked this whole era of exchange into high gear. Then we'll travel along the three major trade arteries, the Silk Roads, the Indian Ocean, and the Trans-Saharan routes. After that, we'll zoom out to see the massive consequences of all this connectivity, and we'll wrap up by putting them all side by side to compare. So, what lit the fuse for this explosion in trade? I mean, before we can really understand the routes themselves, we have to look at the political and economic shifts that made it all possible. What created the perfect environment for these networks to thrive? It really boils down to two main drivers. First up, imperial stability. When huge empires rise up and take control, and we're definitely looking at the Mongol Empire here, they create these massive zones of peace and security. Think of it this way: less risk for merchants. And second, you've got a whole wave of innovations in business and transportation. New tools and new ways of doing business, like credit, made trade way more efficient and a whole lot more profitable.
Let's start our journey on the most famous network of them all. Picture the Silk Roads. And don't just picture one single road. Think of it as a massive web of caravan trails, like a giant artery pumping goods, ideas, and people across the entire Eurasian continent.
Okay, this table shows us a really critical economic idea behind the Silk Roads. Traveling overland was expensive and super slow, right? So merchants weren't hauling around cheap, heavy stuff. They focused on goods with a high value-to-weight ratio. We're talking luxury items, beautiful silks, delicate porcelain, high-quality steel. And this whole system was supported by some pretty slick financial tech, like bills of exchange, kind of like an early version of a check, and the caravanserai. These were basically fortified roadside inns, crucial safe zones for traders in cities like Kashgar and Samarkand. Now, the real catalyst for the Silk Roads revival was the Mongol effect. This is huge. By creating this enormous unified land empire, the Mongols established what we call the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. They weren't just brutal conquerors. They were smart rulers who knew trade was valuable. They made the routes safe, got rid of bandits, and even supported infrastructure like the caravanserai. This state-sponsored security made trade across Eurasia safer and more common than ever before. All right, time to put your thinking cap on. Let's do some active learning. Your job is to boil this all down. In one single, solid sentence, explain how the Mongol Empire boosted trade and communication across Afro-Eurasia. Go ahead, pause this explainer and jot down your answer. Okay, let's see how you did. Here's a model answer. The Mongols' political consolidation of Eurasia created a period of peace, Pax Mongolica, that secured land-based trade routes, encouraging commerce and the transfer of technology and ideas across their vast empire. Hey, if you used words like political consolidation, peace, or security, you're absolutely on the right track. Nice work. Okay, so we're leaving the dusty, dry overland routes of the Silk Road and heading out to sea. Let's pivot to the massive maritime superhighway of the Indian Ocean. This thing was a bustling network connecting an incredible diversity of cultures, all the way from East Africa to Southeast Asia. You know, the most important piece of technology for this whole system wasn't even made by humans. It was the environment itself, the monsoon winds. These things were like clockwork. For half the year, they blew reliably from the southwest, and for the other half, they blew from the northeast. This created a perfect, predictable rhythm for trade. It was like a natural engine that sailors could count on century after century. Of course, human innovation was still totally essential. Sailors developed all sorts of amazing maritime tech, like the Latin sail to catch the wind, the astrolabe for navigation, and bigger, better ships like the dhow. And this brings us to a huge difference from the Silk Roads. Because ships could carry so much more than camels, merchants could transport not just luxury goods like spices, but also bulk goods. We're talking timber, cotton, and food. The carrying capacity of the sea was just a whole different ballgame. And, it's important to remember, these routes were also tragically used to transport enslaved people. The economic impact here was massive. All this trade led to the growth of powerful new states that controlled key ports, like the city-states along the Swahili coast or the Sultanate of Malacca. And it wasn't just economic. It also created huge cultural shifts. You had the formation of diasporic communities, where merchants would settle in new lands. For example, you see Arab and Persian merchants moving to East Africa, blending with the local populations, and creating brand new syncretic cultures. For our final route, we're heading across the world's largest desert. And don't let the sand fool you. These sand roads were incredibly important. They were the vital link connecting West Africa to North Africa and the wider Mediterranean world. The story of this route really comes down to two things: gold and salt. West Africa had unbelievable amounts of gold, but what it needed was salt. Salt was a critical preservative in the hot tropical climate. So merchants from North Africa would haul these huge slabs of salt south and trade them for gold. And the technology that made it all possible? The camel, obviously, but specifically innovations like the camel's saddle that allowed them to carry heavier loads. And all this wealth built powerful empires, like Ghana and most famously, the Mali Empire. So just like the Mongols on the Silk Roads, you had these big empires like Mali providing the security needed for trade to really take off. But here, there was another incredibly powerful unifying force at play: the spread of Islam. Islam created a shared culture and a common legal system. A merchant could travel from North Africa all the way to West Africa and find people who spoke the same commercial language, Arabic, and who operated under a shared system of Islamic law. This built a ton of trust and made doing business way easier. Okay, so we've traveled the routes. Now it's time to zoom out and look at the big picture. What did all this connection actually do? Well, it was completely transformative, but it was absolutely a double-edged sword. It brought amazing progress, but also unbelievable destruction. So, on the bright side, these networks were like superhighways for ideas and technology. Religions like Islam and Buddhism spread way beyond where they started. Scientific knowledge, especially Greco-Islamic medicine, flowed into Europe. Game-changing technologies like gunpowder and paper made their way west from China. And you had travelers like Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo, whose writings literally expanded the known world for their people. But it wasn't just ideas that spread, it was biology too. And this had good and bad sides. You had new crops moving to new places, which improved diets and helped populations grow. Think about Champa race in East Asia, urban eras in Africa. But the same routes that carried silk and spices also carried germs. The incredible interconnectedness of the Silk Roads is exactly what allowed the bacterium Yersinia pestis to spread so fast, causing the bubonic plague, the Black Death, which led to one of the deadliest demographic catastrophes in all of human history. All right, let's pull all these threads together. Being able to compare these networks, what made them similar and what made them different, is honestly one of the most critical skills you'll need for this unit. This chart right here is the synthesis. It brings everything we've talked about into sharp focus. You can see the similarities, right? All three were boosted by new technologies and the stability that large states provided. But the differences are where the really sharp analysis comes in. Look at the goods. The Silk Roads were all about lightweight luxuries. The Indian Ocean could handle both luxury and heavy bulk goods. And the Trans-Saharan route was defined by that unique gold for salt trade. The tech was perfectly suited to the environment: camels in the desert, dhows on the ocean. And the role of the state was different too, from the massive security blanket of the Mongol Empire to the more decentralized trade-focused city-states of the Swahili coast. Okay, one final self-assessment. Pause for a moment and really think about this. Can you identify one big similarity in what caused these networks to grow? And can you pinpoint one key difference in the kinds of goods they traded? This will really lock in the concepts for you. So what's the final takeaway? Between 1200 and 1450, these networks spun a complex web across Afro-Eurasia. And they moved more than just stuff. They were conduits for ideas, technology, religion, new foods, and devastating diseases. In doing all of this, they completely reshaped societies and laid the very foundation for the interconnected, globalized world we live in today. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. How did the dynamics of the 13th century, this incredible promise of wealth and prosperity running right alongside the danger of catastrophic pandemics, how does that mirror the challenges and the opportunities of our own globalized world? The parallels are pretty powerful, and they remind us that the patterns of the past are still very much with us in the present.